joined by our head of operations and member engagement, Jana Gorettaja. And I'm really pleased today to welcome both Ines Kempfer, the CEO of the Center for Child Rights in Business, as well as Anne Renner, who is with Save the Children Germany. The two of them are experts in their field, and today, of course, we're talking specifically about child labor remediation. We have invited Ines and Anne to talk about the hub today, and they will tell you more about this in the context of the Global Battery Alliance broader mission and mandate, which addressing and eliminating child labor from battery supply chains was one of the foundational issues really that the GBA was meant to address, and which we have worked on extensively in our child labor working group over the last 2 years to produce one of the foundational indicators and rulebooks for the battery passport. And it really sets out frameworks and mechanisms and tools for companies to address the root causes and the risks of child labor in their supply chains. But in addition to this due diligence and reporting today, we thought it was really complementary to share some of the practical measures on the ground and some of the practical instruments which companies can also interact with. So in that respect, it's my great pleasure to officially welcome Ines and Anne to tell you more about this, and we're happy to take any questions afterwards. You can raise your hand and we'll be taking the questions in order. So with that, I think I'm handing over to Anne. Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks so much for that kind introduction. Thanks also for having us. Ines and I are very excited to give you a brief insight into what we have been doing in the DRC and Kolwezi specifically since 2021. So maybe as a very, very brief introduction on Save the Children and on the Center for Child Rights in Business to you, to those of you who might not be familiar with us. Save the Children is the biggest independent child rights organization in the world. We have about 25,000 colleagues in about 120 countries of the world, where we do very traditional NGO programming in the field of education, health, and child protection. So this means that we do community-based interventions, very locally rooted. What we do as well, and this we do with our daughter organization, the Center for Child Rights in Business, is cooperate very specifically and pragmatically with companies to protect and improve child rights situation within the due diligence of companies in global supply chains. One of those supply chains, if we could go forward in the slide deck, please. One of the supply chains where we do our work and where we do cooperate with companies is in the ASM Cobalt supply chain in the DRC. Is it just me who's not seeing the slide? Oh, sorry, it's my fault. Yes, so this is what we will be presenting now is on Kolwezi, on artisanal and small-scale mining communities in Kolwezi in the DRC. In 2021, the center and us carried out together a study to really understand very pragmatically and very clearly what the child rights risks in ASM communities are, and also what specific opportunities for companies are in order to go about improving them. Actually, like I came out of another webinar where we were talking about risk management, and this is always so abstract that we feel that it's really helpful to look at the very specific issues around child rights risk. I'm sure that most of you are somewhat familiar with it, but what really came out to us in our study in 2021 is that as dire on an abstract level as the situation is, very pragmatically, we have a huge education crisis on our hand. So you can see on the right-hand side some stats. We saw that about every third child of school-going age does not attend school. And the other aspect of the education crisis that we did see unfold, and which has gotten worse ever since the COVID pandemic, is that really the hidden and not so hidden costs related to education do lead to child labor, meaning that what we often see linking to low income and the non-existence of safety nets in those communities is that once parents do not have enough money any longer in order to pay for the school fees, often younger siblings drop out. They cannot attend school anymore. But we also saw is that older kids often do go work. They do work in ASM mining in order to pay for them going to school, or they do go to work then in order to pay for the sibling schooling. So we do see, and we did prove that that there's a very strong interconnection between these two aspects. What we also saw is that many formalization projects actually do create greater risks for children and that their rights to be protected. Because what we did see is that with every formalization project, we usually build higher walls or we dig deeper trenches in order to prevent, no, sorry, we put too fast, to prevent people from accessing mining sites. And as much as that might make sure that on this very specific site, there is maybe no child labor or young workers who should not be working there as yet, this is one site less, which is somewhat controlled, where young people, can earn a living. And what this means is that children, because of this, obviously do not go back to school, and they also do not find other better working possibilities elsewhere. It means that they're being pushed to even more informal sites where there is no regulation whatsoever and where there is no protection whatsoever. Another aspect that we did see is that in those communities, there is a big gap in terms of decent working possibilities. So for many young people who do want to work because they cannot access schooling any longer, because they do have to support for, their family, or because they want to, there is not a big choice of jobs that they can look into. There is hardly any apprenticeship possibilities or vocational training opportunities. So this means that because of this lack of decent work opportunities, most young people, so this is now people who are still under the age of 18 and thus legally a child, but who have reached the legal working age, usually or very often, you can see a 72%, as I said, end up being engaged in ASM mining. In our study, we spoke to a lot of children, to adolescents, to parents, and a lot of them reported, in addition to big health risk on a physical level, that the mining, living there, but also being engaged in ASM mining has a huge negative impact on their on their psychological health. So a lot of young people told us that 24/7, every day, year in, year out, they are feeling very stressed, they are feeling anger, they're feeling frustrated, obviously with lots of long-lasting impact on their health. And what we did also see, and with that you can maybe go to the next slide, is that as many projects as there already are in Kolwezi and other ASM communities, most of them are too short. They are not long enough. And what we mean by that is that if we imagine having a 2, 3, 4-year project cycle, which is what Save the Children also very often does in a normal setting, or in different settings where that might be opportune, it means that an 8-year-old child that we identify in child labor and reintegrated into schooling would only be in the context of a 4-year-old project, 12 years old by the time that the project comes to an end. And what we see, and Ines can maybe talk a bit about that later, our global experience in the context of child labor remediation shows that we really do need to accompany children until they reach the age where they can transition into a legal working age, because otherwise, especially when the income is not substituted, the risks are just way too high that they do fall back into child labor. So what we did, based on the study findings and in collaboration with other partners, among them the Fair Cobalt, the Fair Cobalt Alliance, is that we built up the Child Labor Remediation Hub. A question that we very often get is that companies would rather engage on the preventative side of things and landscape approaches. And as much as that is obviously very relevant, what we see is that these projects often take so long until all our stakeholders have gotten together and we've rallied around behind the same definitions and so on and so forth. And in all those years, actually, while we are talking right now, children as young as 8, 9, 10 years are engaged in mining. So the reason that we build up the hub, and Ines is going to talk a bit more about its activities, is that we need to start supporting these children today, very pragmatically, but also long-term, so meaning until the age of 16, and support them in this transition period until they can find safe work, which would then no longer constitute child labor. And with that, Ines, maybe I hand over to you so you can talk about what practically the Child Hub does and how it can link to the Global Battery Alliance's Child Labor Index.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anne. Good evening on my side, everyone, or good morning. I'm really happy to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit more about our work, which obviously is very close to our heart. So we're really happy to get the opportunity to talk about this. Anne, I assume you just continue the slides, and I'll just give you a hint, or is it Philip who's the slide master? Or it's you,
Surprise,
Jan.
yeah.
Sorry, sorry, Anna. Awesome, yes. Thank you. So just to put a little bit into context what we're trying to do with the hub, as Anna already indicated, this is a very simplified version of a much more complicated theory of change that we developed in this work when we started looking into the conditions, and after we've done the research, which clearly showed us something needs to be done, more needs to be done. And that is really also complementary to many of the initiatives that are already on the ground. So you have here on the bottom layer all the issues that Anna just described, with really the kind of from the acute child protection issues to the low income, etc. We have the root causes here, and we were kind of trying to think, how can we really specifically tackle those, and what are the ways to work on it. And we think there need to be two streams, one focused strongly on remediation, because we do have children that are working on the mines today, and they need to get access to remedy. A lot of times child labor remediation is immediately switched with prevention, meaning like we do something to prevent it. And I think, unfortunately, one of the issues by doing so is that we don't manage to break the cycle, because as long as we have children in that situation, these children will be poor. As long as they live, they will have poor children themselves, and kind of the root causes leading to those issues will just continue existing. So we need to break the cycle, and that's what we're trying to do with all the remediation activities. So the hub that I'm going to talk about a little bit more is really focusing on this kind of long-term remediation, taking children out of work, but also making available things like emergency fund when children need immediate help. A lot of the children that we're dealing with in DRC do have health issues, whether that's psychological. We have children that are 11 years old and are heavily addicted to drugs. That comes with additional health issues, physical issues, but obviously also with all the issues related to addiction. And so we need to have a set of intervention to support those children. But we also need to support children to stay either in any form of youth development programs, because a lot of times, even when they get 16, even we get them to this point, the way the situation is right now is that there is very little opportunity. I think we saw 70% of the youth that are working in the ASM communities are working in mining. And what that shows is that there is nearly no other opportunities if you're 17 years old and you're looking for a job and you're old enough legally to work and you live in Kolwezi, there's a really good chance that your only job that is available is somewhere in an artisanal mine. And so that is obviously a big issue. And these are still children, and they're still exposed to very hazardous conditions. So what we try to do, and what this kind of theory of change tries to show, is that we try to place the activities of the hub that are very strongly focused, particularly in the beginning, on remediation, into a context where also preventative measures are going, and our hope are taking place. And our hope is that remediation over time will become less important, as we should have less children in mines, whereas preventative activities should continue to grow. But we need to start with quite a heavy focus on remediation, because we do have, it's not very clear how many, like particularly in the Kolwezi area, how many children are in mines. I know from staff that if we had the finances and the resources, that we probably could find 1,000 children tomorrow, just around where we are. But we don't have clear numbers on how many. There's very different estimates, whether it's 5,000 or 20,000, etc. But it's definitely a significant number, and also I think what makes this crisis so challenging is that every single of these cases, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but is like a worst case of child labor linked to a million of other issues. So the center has been remediating over 900 cases in the last 4 years globally in different supply chains, very different industries. But we've never been, I think the gravity and the severity of the cases are definitely, have never been as, or are never as bad as what we see in the DRC on a regular basis. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So what we're trying to do, so the hub is really, the single one aim is to create this long-term prevention and remediation for children in ASM communities. And we're trying to really focus on standardizing processes, collaboration and system integration. That's always been our goal from the beginning, that we don't create something on top of other processes, but that we integrate as well as possible. There's a caveat to that because many of the kind of existing systems don't really function. So we'll have to be very considered in how we do that, but the goal is different. Where systems are functioning, we do integrate them. It is a mix between immediate action and long-term support, training, reporting and funding streams, bringing those funding streams right to the source. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. You can go to the next slide. So the focus of the hub has now kind of crystallized in the last 2 years that we've been building it, and last year that we've really effectively piloted it, and in 2024, hopefully the year where we really also scale up the efforts, is obviously the long-term child labor remediation, as Anna indicated, so that children are in a program that supports them, and I'll talk about that in a second, what that means, until the minimum they're 16. But that we also integrate with different existing initiatives and government child protection system. As I mentioned, that's not so easy, but I'll have a kind of little case study at the end to show how we practically do that. We do see the importance to strengthen access to schooling, and that relates both to the children that are in the remediation program, but also to children that might be at risk, because we need to create, like the crisis is also an education crisis, as Anna pointed out. So we need to create stronger schools. We need to create better equipped teachers that really have a sense for how to support vulnerable children to keep them from dropping out. What I think is always very touching when we talk to children in the DRC is an enormous eagerness to go to school. And we can see that many children actually start working in the mines because they want to afford schooling. So they say, my parents can't pay the school fees anymore, so I go and work in the mines so I get the money and then I can go back to school. But obviously it's a vicious cycle that we are dealing with. And then related to that, the really strong importance of youth development and access to training and decent work for youth that is outside of the mines, as I just described, this challenge that youth in the area, particularly youth that's not coming from middle or higher class and has strong education backgrounds will have a lot of challenges. I just realized I can change the slides myself. Sorry, Anna. So yeah, sorry, I will do that. You guys see the next slide now, right? When I change it, that changes for everyone?
No,
it doesn't.
But it only changes for you.
Okay, sorry about that. Sorry, guys.
Should it be number 8 or number 9?
It should be 9, supporting long-term child remediation. Thank you. So what does it mean when we say that? So we use that term a couple of times now. So basically, it's not rocket science in a way. It's actually quite simple. It includes some of the key elements, and that is that the children can, at the minimum, complete a compulsory education, or like the 9 years of schooling. Generally, it also means that children are being supported and their families are being supported financially with some sort of a living stipend or tuition. This is often a sticking point because that creates cost, and people feel like also that makes it too expensive. Unfortunately, in our experience, there's no way around it, because the number one reason for those children to work is that they cannot afford not to work. And if we take them out, even if we give them a school bag, even if we make the school a bit nicer, even if they have a bicycle to ride to school, if there is not some sort of replacement of the money that the children are not making by not working, we'll always have a challenge. Now, sometimes that might be possible to replace that income with other income generating activities. But again, these are often long-term prospects. Even if we teach the parents to build their own business, it's not it's not sure that this is going to work. Even if it's going to work, it's going to take a long time. And we often see in child labor remediation, if we rely on that, children will fall back into the child labor situation. So, from our perspective, and also from a child rights perspective, supporting the children and families financially to ensure they do not have to go and work is really an absolute essential element to kind of reinstate their right for a childhood and reinstate their right for education. Sometimes there is possibilities like alternative job opportunities for the child's family. This is, in actually my experience, quite rare that we can do that, because a lot of times it's very rare that we have a family where the parents are just sitting around and just waiting for a better day and the children are working. Most of the times, if the parents are not working, it's due to their ill health, or it's many of the children in DRC in particular have broken families, because there's a lot of the poverty, the displacements, etc., can create a lot of social issues. Then it's important that these elements are implemented long term until the child is at the minimum in working age, which in DRC is 16. And for this long-term implementation, we need to have an actual case manager. We need to have people who manage their cases. This is not something we can just do in one snap of a finger, 1,000 children. We send a couple of checks out to different families. In our experience, it needs a case-to-case follow-up for those children, because also every case is different. And child labor is never an isolated, or rarely, particularly in DRC, it's not an isolated issue. It's an issue that always comes together with a lot of other challenges. For example, many children have missed 3-4 years of school. So it's not just about telling them go back to school, because they're too old to go to grade 1. But their education level might be way too low to go to good grade of their age, etc. So it needs a lot of effort to reintegrate them. And so all of this does create costs, obviously. So whenever we talk about long-term child labor remediation, we think about covering tuition fees, any fees that children need to pay to access education, covering living costs or living stipends. We also cover other kind of child protection issues, for example, for vulnerable children that might have to stay in children's homes, or children who need additional support, whether that's healthcare, etc. So that's just some very practical kind of aspects of what this means to do long-term child labor remediation. You can go to the next slide. Didn't change on my side, but I can. Has it changed for you?
It has. I think you just have to click on a button that says something like synchronize with presenter.
Thanks, Anne. Yes. I just was joking today that I feel more and more like a boomer. And so, yeah, yes, it has changed now. I think it comes with age. Okay, thank you. Yes, so now you might be underwhelmed by those numbers. Yeah, the pilot phase that we are just coming out of it, we managed to integrate 20 children into the long-term child labor remediation program. But we also now have 6 organizations. These are local civil society organizations in the DRC, in the Kolwezi area, that are working with the hub and are actually now part of the funding members of the legal structure of the hub. All of these organizations and their staff have been trained. We have now a total of 19 junior case managers that are trained in how to accompany the children long term. I know those numbers look very small. I can say that getting to those numbers was an huge, enormous kind of task to get to, because we are working in a system with very, very little kind of basis to build on. People have not been trained, they're not have been system. Every organization, none of the organizations we worked with had transparent accounting systems. We're tracing their expenses. Here we're creating a system where children are receiving money. There needs to be a lot of transparency. There needs to be a lot of accountability, etc. So that's been a tremendous task. And obviously there's a certain level of cost involved. But we're very positive because we now got financing to get a total of 50 children integrated in the CLR Hub at a time during 2024. So we'll have 50 children in the program. And we are going to increase organizations who support the remediation, not just as case managers, but we also starting collaborations, for example, with Bon Pasteur, to give access to, for example, they have a great program on catch-up courses, so for children who missed schooling. So we're creating structured kind of relationships with these organizations. And I'll talk in a second about an example there. We also show how we link to Save the Children programming that is beyond the hub. We also hope to have 5 what we call accredited case managers. So these are case managers that can work more independently, can train other case managers, and kind of have the systems of transparency in and out. You can go to the next slide. So this is just, I'm not going to go through every box, but it's just to highlight that we're really not working in a isolation, but we're linking to the different existing system and organizations. So we're trying to link with education projects. I just mentioned SAFE. Bon Pasteur is another provider of education projects. We are working with children's homes that can be temporary homes for children that do not have a family to live with when we find them. We are linking the hub efforts to the formalization projects, for example, the Fair Cobalt Alliance, which has also been one of the organizations that helped to start up the hub with funding that comes in through the members, and that continues supporting with funding through the members. It's independent, so the FCA doesn't run the hub, but their members are supporting a certain number of cases that can be integrated. We also, whenever possible, we work with government agencies and exchange information. For example, there is often very little that we can build on, to be very honest. But we, for example, do know that the Department for Social Affairs has a registration system to know where children are, and so we started using that notification form when we find children and those children are not living with their families, to ensure that we inform the department about where the children are, and that's often the first time that they hear about it, because they didn't have the information on who are the children who live in what children's homes. And that has helped us actually to create a stronger relationship to these government departments, who are generally incredibly thankful for anyone who does something for real. When we met, I think Anna, you were there, one of the representative of, I think it was the Family and Children's Affairs Department, and he said, just don't give me another capacity building. I know what I'm supposed to do. I don't have any money, so I can't help anyone. And as the hub is really funneling funds that directly go to children and families, I think it's perceived as as a different initiative, and it creates a lot of kind of support amongst government departments. I can go to the next slide. So I'm going to be a little bit faster, but so on top of the remediation that we've been just talking about quite extensively, the hub will be going and start piloting youth development programs that aim at creating decent work opportunities. So this is kind of a way of remediating slightly differently. So if we have, for example, that can be a restaurant business, that can be a formal kind of large-scale mine who has, let's say, office jobs or out-of-mine jobs that they can offer that are non-hazardous and that are safe, and that can be offered to youth. And we have run similar programs in different parts of the world. The whole idea of these programs is not just that we go and educate youth and tell them, give them skills that they might then have, but still not be able to apply because nobody's hiring them because they're under 18, but that we're working first with the business to open opportunities for youth, and then youth is being trained on the job and on top of in soft skills while they're working in these businesses. It's a very kind of big shift in thinking for businesses to do that. Because they're kind of like, oh yeah, I can support training for youth, but then when you say, no, we also want you to actually hire the youth and give them decent work opportunity, seems like a big ask, but we've seen in a range of other industry that this has been incredibly sustainable, and the businesses then carry that youth development program. And on top of this, as mentioned before, that's on the next slide, we are aiming to go through we're aiming this year to start some work streams that are more focused on school improvements, but also after school centers, because we realize that children need to have places where to go, particularly the younger ones, so they don't go with their parents to the mines, and on top of that, that they have some support outside of school, for example, to complete their homework or to create other skills, which is also essential kind of in breaking this cycle of getting into the mines and start working. I think the next slide, I have to go back to my thing, is the, yeah, so the expected outcome, what we're really hoping to achieve, and I think in like are on track in some degree to achieve, but obviously we need to create much more scale, is that we really reduce effectively the child labor risk in these areas, that we have improved youth and decent work opportunities, that we have more decent work opportunities, that we are creating stronger awareness on these issues and really working with the different downstream actors who are engaging in the hub to understand the challenges around it. And we're also creating that network of community facilitators that will allow us to continuously work on child labor, continuously understand the child labor risks that are related to that. And I think last but really not least, that we're establishing a kind of a remediation fund, and the fund as kind of a channel for funding that can go in large parts directly to the children, to the families, to the communities, and there really create an impact. Because on the systemic kind of issue that obviously also needs to be solved on the side, but is the fact that the ASM communities do not benefit sufficiently to date from that business, right? While other businesses do make money out of mining, the communities don't. And so we need to, at this point at least, artificially kind of readjust that. And that's why funding needs to go from downstream actors into these upstream communities. Okay, I'll end with a quick case study of a girl named Mado. That's not her real name, but other than that, everything is absolutely real of the story. And she was one of the 20 kids that now has been integrated into the pilot program. You can go to the next slide. We identified, our mother was found, she was 12 years old. She's been working in the Casula mine. She's already, at the time we found or talked to her, she was already working there for 2 years. She has been working there for 2 years. She, for a while, lived with her aunt, but I think when we met her, her aunt has already kicked her out of the house for a range of reasons, and she couldn't live with her anymore. She was estranged from her family, who had, I think, 3 years prior, sent her to her aunt, and didn't really know where her family is. So after she got integrated into the remediation program, there was a range of steps that was taken. She was ensured a residence at a children's home where she could live, as she didn't have any family to go to. She received a living stipend, so the children's home received money to look after her, to make sure that she has enough to eat and clothes, etc. And also there were several efforts taken to reintegrate her into schooling. Again, it was a big challenge because she missed about 4 years of school, and to reintegrate her at that age was really difficult. But she managed to get back to school. She had an assigned case manager, who is actually, that's the woman that you see in the picture in the black t-shirt. That's Natalie, her case manager, who's been kind of accompanying Mado ever since. Then the case manager, with support from the hub, managed to find the parents, and step by step we did kind of a family kind of like a family reunification program that doesn't normally is not done in once. Then she could spend some time during vacation at the family home, etc. And when all of that went well, it was then decided to reunite her with her family and send her back to live with her family. Her family lives in very poor condition. It wasn't an easy decision because we were like, you know, is she better off in the children's home where there's actual walls, or in her home where there's just kind of like tarp walls that are kind of more of like a tent? But it was decided that, given the family was really eager to be reunited, that this is the better place with her. And we made this decision together with also child protection experts from Save the Children. We then got the government involved. That was the Department of Divas that got involved, and together we could then officially kind of bring her back and kind of bring her back in the care of the family. And it was really timely because actually the children's home she stayed at was about to close, and she would have been integrated in the state's orphanage system, where, based on the information we got from the government, the parents would have lost any access to her and where she is. And she's now back with her family. What is great is that we could also integrate her into a school that is part of a Save the Children education program, where teachers have been trained, for example, in child protection. And so she kind of gets an environment that is more protective and supportive of her situation. I think she's still got a really tough path ahead of her. I think she is enrolled in grade 4, so she is about 3 years back from her age than her normal enrollment. But we've got a quote on this slide as well from one of her teachers, and who's actually really, really impressed with her progress. So she seems to be actually a very academic child who performs very well. So this is just one story, but I thought it's important to tell it because you can see some of the complexities. So when we say 20, it's 20 times these kind of stories. And when we say our goal is to have 50 this year, and hopefully in the next couple of years, we'll get to a hub capacity of around 200 children at a time. But then this is 200 stories like that. So it needs a lot of support system to do that. Yeah. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about the role of downstream actors, etc. But I think I've talked a lot so far. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Ines and Anna. Really appreciate this. Like I said in the beginning, the issue of child labor and eliminating it from battery supply chain is one of the issues that goes to the heart of the GBA and the membership. And I think what your presentation has done is to really demonstrate that there's no quick fixes, and it cannot in any circumstances be reduced to a sort of box ticking exercise. This, child labor, due diligence, and addressing these risks in a sustainable manner. So really appreciate you demonstrating that. I could ask some questions, but I actually I would love to hear some reactions from the participants in the group. Some of them are also very familiar with these issues, and I see one of these hands already going up. And love to hear from some of the challenges as well that companies are facing on the ground, and how that interacts with some of the measures that you're proposing as well. But Susanna, please go ahead.
Thank you, and thanks very much for the presentation. I'm Susanna McLaren. I'm a GBA board member, but I'm also head of responsible sourcing and sustainability at the Cobalt Institute, which is the industry association for Cobalt. And we're also members of the Fair Cobalt Alliance. So I think my question, of course, is less about the downstream, given who we represent, but more maybe for our knowledge at the Cobalt Institute as we work on these issues together with the Fair Cobalt Alliance. But also we liaise very closely with the Congolese government. So I actually have two questions. One would be around how much you do engage with the DRC government and how aligned you are with them, and particularly the work that they had initiated through the ILO and how that interfaces. And the second question is, you mentioned, these terrible numbers that we're seeing, but given that the price of cobalt is currently really at rock bottom, I just wanted to understand what you're seeing the impact on the children. We visited in June and actually visited Kamilombe together with the Fair Cobalt Alliance, and noted just generally, it's not a good environment for the artisanal miners who suffer as a result of the cobalt prices, as do others. So I was just wondering what you're seeing as some of the knock-on impacts on the children specifically. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susanna, and really happy to meet you and talk together. Yes, so first of all, in kind of how much we engage, so we try to engage as much as possible. We are in regular contact with the ILO around their project. to be very frank, we're still looking for these really practical ways of integrating their efforts in kind of monitoring child labor situation into the system. One of the things that I do think have been in parts coming out of the project is that they start to have a different kind of form on how they register children that are in child labor. And that is, for example, something we've already agreed and we're practically doing, is that when we do integrate children in our remediation system, that we do inform the government agencies, so not to create a duplication or like a side system where we have a database on children in child labor and they're not aware of it. So that is one very practical way that we could align. It's not always so evident, I think, for everyone to find those ways, but the communication is there, and I think from our side, and I also think from the ILO side, the interest is there to align as much as possible. I think what we don't right now have in the ILO and government effort is these very practical solutions. So what are we now doing with the kids? Who's looking after the kids? Who's making sure they're actually getting integrated in a school, etc. And I think that's where the value of the hub comes in. And then to your second question on the numbers, and also the fact that it's not a good time for artisanal mines, and the numbers of miners on many of the mines have been reduced significantly, and we have seen that. I've been talking quite a bit to our staff on why it is then that children are still working. In some places they say, well, the children are still here, or they haven't moved on to other kind of opportunities, and then they work for very, very little. And in a context where payment or where prices are low, these potential add-ons are helpful. So by the way, the little picture that you see on the left-hand side, that's one I just took out of my car in last October. It was still very easy for us to just see children working at the outskirts of the formal bigger mines, inside some of the kind of artisanal hotspots. So there's still really a significant number, but I do actually think there is a risk if the pricing would change, that the number would further increase. But it seems that there is a certain stagnant number that doesn't seem to go away. And yeah, the one way of explaining is that then in times of low prices, cheap labor is even more sought after. But I don't have the entire answer. And as I said, the numbers and how many there are, it's really hard to say.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. But thanks so much for those questions. Yeah. And as so sorry to add on. Obviously, I've been given that we're working with those kids and we see all those kind of sad stories. We sometimes are a bit biased in terms of the glasses half full. There is real efforts, and for example, a mine of Kamilombe, you will not see hundreds of children working, given that they have done a formalization or going through a formalization process. The risk is though that if it's not done well, that we're just moving kids, right? We have seen that with other, like the Mutoshi mine we have evidence in our research that kids just moved around. So we've done a good job on that mine, but then the kids couldn't access it anymore, which should be, they shouldn't access it, but because their issue wasn't solved, they still needed the money, they still needed the livelihood, they just go to the next possible opportunities that are often then even more like hazardous or kind of more hidden as well, as they're just moving around.
Thanks, Ines. Thanks, Susanna. Are there any other immediate questions or comments or experiences to share from anybody else on the call? Otherwise, I'm going to volunteer a question. Sorry,
Hello.
Go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. I am Elvire Moreau. I work for the Renault Group automaker. I arrived a couple minutes late, so I'm sorry if I missed this information, but where does the funding come from for your project right now, and what does it look like for the future years?
Thanks. Don't think we really fully covered that. So we did have some kind of start funding, from that came directly through Save the Children and also through the FCA. So that was kind of our first bucket of funding that we could work with. I think the FCA funding in parts was also made possible through some funding from the Dutch government. Now, as we're already getting more that also helped us really to set up the structures, and as I did mention at the beginning, that was incredibly hard to do so. As we're now kind of really advanced on that side and have this strong local group of CSOs who are working on this, the funding now should come and is coming from mainly from downstream actors. In parts, that's still FCA members who contribute through their membership fees, and the FCA gives a certain percentage to child labor remediation, and some of that goes to the hub. And on top of that, we have other companies. We actually have some of the formal mining companies who've made some commitment for 2024, and we also have some downstream actors who are actually quite far away from the cobalt business as such, but they see, because of the products that they sell, that they're part of this story, and we're looking for ways to get engaged and to somehow contribute, because they say, well, we're so far away, we can't, it's not about traceability, or it's not about working with our suppliers, because these suppliers are component suppliers, or like so it's very hard for them to create that connection. But because they're using cobalt, they understand that they're part of that story and they want to engage. And so the goal is that the amount of funding from downstream partners will continue to increase, and that with that we can create some scale. There is also some efforts to get maybe some more institutional fundings, but I think the main business model as such is that it's downstream actors who contribute to that, because we do think it's an industry challenge. It's nobody's fault. It's just a fact, and it's just a fact that right now parts of that kind of green transition is happening on the back of very vulnerable communities and children, and so we think there needs to be a reaction to that by the industry.
Thanks so much, Ines. This does actually set me up perfectly for the question that I had for you, which is, of course, relating it back to the work that the Global Battery Alliance is doing on the battery passport in particular, which, in essence, is a transparency and accountability framework for issues and risks that are associated with battery value chains. First and foremost among those, or one of the foundational issues, being the issue of child labor. So, you said traceability itself is not the answer, but I would like, to get your view on the role of transparency and that collective responsibility, and to what extent concepts like the battery passport, where do you see the role of this in helping to address this and creating that collective accountability that spans across the supply chain, and that sort of shares the full picture in terms of any impacts and risks.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm actually I think where the battery passport is going in terms of its requirements or its requirements or standards around remediation. I think it's very strong, and I think it's very aligned with that sort of remediation that we're talking about, which is the effective access to remedy for children. And it's not, I don't, traceability is great in the sense when it leads to more accountability and, as you say, collective accountability. I just always, when we talk to companies, from our perspective, we think it's important to weigh, do I need to trace every gram of cobalt? Or is it enough for me, because I have a certain level of transparency and I do know what's going on in for example, the Cobalt ASM mines, and actually, particularly in regards to cobalt, it's kind of simpler than in many other supply chains, because you have such a concentration of the cobalt resources into one area, and in that area you have a lot of artisanal mines. So there is just a very good chance that, and knowing how the supply chains work, there is a very good chance that ASM cobalt is coming into the supply chains. And I think from our side, that in itself is also not a negative thing, because right now the communities, the local communities, the only way to be part of that whole mining kind of business and industry is through the artisanal mines, because the or the number of people who can, for example, engage or get jobs in formal mines is very little, and it's often not necessarily the local population because they do not have the education level that is needed, etc. So from our side, we've been like we definitely think ASM should not be excluded, and it should not be a traceability that is like, oh, I'm gonna show that my cobalt is not coming from DRC, therefore I am not concerned. We know that companies take this approach, and maybe from a risk management, pure risk management perspective, that is understandable. We always want to look at things from a human rights and child rights perspective, and from there we think that these people should have the right to be included in the industry, should do that, so be able to do so very transparently, but obviously under better conditions, and so we all need to work towards that. I don't know if I really answered your question, Inga, but yeah.
No, you definitely did. Thank you so much, Ines. I guess, again, happy to take any other question, but the next question that naturally invites itself is, of course, in terms of your most urgent needs or biggest challenges, and the ways in which GBA members or even the organization can help, increase the impact that you're having. Because, of course, one thing is funding. Elvira has already asked this question, but to what extent would you say that even raising awareness or understanding of the complexity, maybe also telling some success stories that there are pathways to address this in a sustainable manner. It'd be great to get your sense on what would be your call to action actually to the GBA and its members, and what are the biggest challenges that you need help addressing with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so obviously, right, allowing funds getting into these kind of activities is essential. I do. So the Center for Child Rights and Business in itself, although we are owned by Save the Children, but we're not a NGO, so we're very unfamiliar with like fundraising calls, and we don't do that. For us, and the way we work with companies, it's much more about helping companies to understand their responsibilities, and obviously in line with human rights due diligence framework, etc. So for us, definitely a first step is to create this awareness, and I think for us it's to create awareness that every company that has cobalt somewhere in their products is somehow part of that story. And that's not about blaming or shaming or pointing fingers. It's just a fact, because we live in a global world where things are so linked that a story like Mado's story is one that links back to us. It links back to our phones that we're using and our cars that we're using, etc. And understanding that linkages, and I think the Global Battery Alliance can obviously do a lot in creating that understanding. And we just got a commitment of funding from a Swiss company. I think I can tell their name. They're Dormakaba, and they're just committed for a 10-year kind of contribution. And it's not so much. I mean, obviously that's great that we have the contribution, but what really encouraged me is they're doing electric home safety, like so electric doors and things. So they're not a huge buyer of cobalt, but it's in their products. And what was really encouraging is seeing the understanding of the company. We are part of that story, and we're linked to that supply chain, if we want it or not. And we don't choose it. We don't know exactly from where our cobalt's coming. That is in our components, but we're part of that story. And creating that awareness, and then obviously in this case also then led to actual investment from that company, is obviously something that I think an organization like GBA can really be helpful with.
Thank you. Are there a couple of minutes left for any other final questions or comments from any of the participants? No, I think you've answered all the questions. Perfect. So I suppose, we really appreciate that you took the time, and we'll make sure, to share this widely. And, really also looking forward to continuing this conversation with both of you and your respective organizations on how we can support. Of course, the GBA and the Battery Passport Framework is looking at defining best practices for all salient risks and impacts. So for now, we have this first version of the Child Labour Rulebook. At some point, we're going to have to revisit it again and streamline it into the framework as well, in the context of the EU battery regulation coming into force, how all of this can be obviously coherently positioned to really allow companies to do both, to meet their compliance obligations, but also to have the practical tools to go further and to be recognized for their efforts, independently, which is ultimately the theory of change for the GBA battery passport, and how to actually incentivize these additional steps, right? Which companies do more, and how can we recognize that independently? So, we really hope that we can together continue evolving, this thinking with you. And if there are, any other ideas that you have on how we can help you spread the message, we're certainly happy to continue that conversation. I think I'll probably speak for many of the participants on the call today, and also all the ones that have asked for a recording of the session, that this has been extremely valuable to hear really an on-the-ground example of practical action, and moving away from abstract concepts of risks and due diligence, and really looking at practical measures. So I really appreciate that, and thank you so much on behalf of the Secretariat.
Thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think
Thank you very much.